Los Angeles is being abandoned right now, and what you're about to see isn't an accident or a temporary coincidence, but the silent collapse of one of the most iconic cities on the planet. Just 5 years ago, these streets were packed with tourists from sunrise to sunset. Hollywood Boulevard vibrated with excitement and international accents. Hotels displayed sold-out signs for 11 months straight. Today, at 11 in the morning during peak season, you'll walk through blocks of what should be the entertainment capital of the world and find something deeply unsettling. The Walk of Fame stretches empty beneath your feet. Restaurants on Sunset Boulevard open their doors waiting for customers who never arrive. Street performers stare at horizons with hollow eyes. Tour buses sit idle in parking lots. This shouldn't be happening. Los Angeles was built as the American dream personified, the city where stars are born, the destination dreamed about by millions worldwide. But something changed. Something broke. And what's occurring here is a warning for any metropolis that depends entirely on the illusion of endless glamour and opportunity. Because what you're witnessing isn't a passing crisis, it's a permanent transformation. And you need to understand why it's happening before it's too late for other cities facing similar trajectories across the globe. Let's start from the beginning. Los Angeles was born as a promise of infinite possibility. For over a century, this sprawling metropolis consolidated itself as the global symbol of entertainment, innovation, sunshine, and reinvention. Billions of dollars were invested. Iconic landmarks were erected, from the Hollywood sign to the Griffith Observatory. Sprawling freeways were constructed, connecting beach communities to desert suburbs. Modern infrastructure was installed to support explosive growth. Jobs were created for millions chasing their dreams. The promotional images showed palm-lined boulevards, celebrity sightings, perfect weather year-round, beaches stretching endlessly, the glamorous lifestyle everyone wanted. And the promise worked magnificently. Tourists from every continent arrived in uninterrupted waves. Airlines multiplied direct routes from every major city. Cruise ships docked regularly at the port of Los Angeles. Santa Monica became synonymous with coastal California cool. Beverly Hills positioned itself as the ultimate luxury destination. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed sustainable. Everyone believed this would last forever. But underneath that dazzling surface, something was rotting slowly. Because when you build a paradise based exclusively on extracting maximum profit immediately without thinking about long-term consequences, eventually reality catches up brutally. And Los Angeles became a victim of its own systematic neglect and unchecked greed. First came the homelessness crisis that exploded beyond all control. The city always had people living on streets, but during the last decade, it transformed into something unprecedented in modern American history. Tent encampments began appearing everywhere, not just in Skid Row, but spreading across Hollywood, Venice Beach, Santa Monica, downtown. Entire blocks became open-air homeless communities. The numbers are staggering. Over 75,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County. That's more than the entire population of many American cities. And these aren't hidden away. They're right there on Hollywood Boulevard, right there on the Venice Beach Boardwalk, right there where tourists come expecting movie magic and instead encounter human suffering on a scale they've never witnessed. The images tourists share on social media are devastating. Tents lining star-studded sidewalks, shopping carts blocking storefronts, human waste on streets that should sparkle. And the word spreads instantly. Don't go to Los Angeles. It's not what you think. It's heartbreaking and disturbing. Then came the second blow, and this one hit even harder. The crime surge that shattered the illusion of California dreaming. For years, Los Angeles managed to maintain relatively safe tourist corridors despite broader urban challenges. That changed dramatically. Organized retail theft rings began targeting high-end stores in broad daylight. Smash-and-grab robberies became almost routine on Rodeo Drive. Car break-ins at tourist attractions reached epidemic levels. Visitors parking at Griffith Park returned to find windows shattered and belongings stolen. The statistics are frightening. Vehicle thefts increased by nearly 50% in certain districts. Robberies targeting tourists wearing jewelry or carrying cameras multiplied exponentially. In 2022, a tourist from Australia was shot and killed during a robbery in Venice. The footage went viral globally. The international headlines were brutal. City of Angels becomes City of Danger. Travel agencies started issuing warnings. Foreign governments updated their travel advisories to concerning levels. Tourists began canceling trips they'd planned for years. Some hotels tried minimizing the situation with enhanced security measures. Others created artificial safety bubbles with private guards. But the damage to perception was already catastrophic, because nobody wants to spend their dream vacation wondering if that person approaching them is friendly or threatening. And then came the third factor that many Antolinos don't want to admit, but is fundamentally transforming global travel patterns: the shift in what modern travelers actually want. During the pandemic of 2020 and 2021, the world stopped completely. People reflected deeply about what experiences truly mattered. And when travel resumed, something had changed fundamentally in collective consciousness. Younger travelers no longer wanted cities where visible human suffering creates constant moral discomfort. They didn't want destinations where they felt guilty walking past Ken cities to reach trendy restaurants. They didn't want places where aggressive panhandling made every sidewalk stressful. They wanted authenticity, but also safety and cleanliness. They wanted experiences that felt meaningful, not exploitative. And Los Angeles had become exactly the opposite. The contrast between extreme wealth and desperate poverty was too stark, too visible, too disturbing. Instagram influencers who once flooded Venice Beach with photo shoots now avoided it entirely because the background ruins the aesthetic. TikTok creators who romanticized LA moved to Austin, Miami, Nashville. The cool factor evaporated. Now combine these three devastating factors: uncontrolled homelessness creating visual blight, surging crime destroying sense of safety, generational shift in travel preferences. And add a fourth element that's absolutely crushing: fierce competition from destinations that did everything right while LA did everything wrong. Because while Los Angeles sank into self-created crises, other American cities reinvented themselves intelligently and strategically. Austin positioned itself as the new creative capital with tech energy and live music. Miami became the glamorous tropical alternative with Latin flair. Nashville offered authentic culture and Southern hospitality. San Diego provided California sunshine without the chaos. Even internationally, Dubai created artificial but functional luxury that delivers exactly what it promises. European cities doubled down on history and walkability. Southeast Asian destinations offered exotic adventure at fraction of the cost. Suddenly, the City of Angels wasn't the obvious choice anymore. It wasn't the best value proposition. It didn't offer what contemporary travelers sought, and the numbers began reflecting this brutally. Look at the data, and you'll understand the magnitude of collapse. In 2019, Los Angeles County received roughly 50 million visitors annually. In 2023, that number dropped to approximately 37 million, a decline of over 25% that no tourism ecosystem can absorb without catastrophic consequences. Hotels that operated at 85% occupancy now struggle desperately to maintain 60%. Thousands of hospitality workers have been laid off with no prospects of return. Restaurants that survived decades closed permanently. Retail stores that were destinations themselves now have going out of business signs. Commercial rents plummeted, but still countless properties remain vacant because there's simply insufficient foot traffic to justify opening. Walk down Hollywood Boulevard at 11 in the morning and you'll feel the deeply disturbing sensation of a place that lost its fundamental purpose. The stars embedded in sidewalks remain. The Chinese theater still stands. But the vital energy that defined this place simply evaporated into thin air. And here's where the situation becomes truly and absolutely concerning for anyone who cares about urban futures. Because this type of tourism collapse isn't simply a temporary recession that self-corrects when economic conditions naturally improve. It's a deep structural change requiring complete and painful reinvention. And Los Angeles is trapped in an absolutely brutal economic catch-22. Massive portions of its economy were built around entertainment, tourism, and services. When that primary engine dramatically slows, the entire region suffers in cascade. Jobs in hospitality vanish. Restaurant workers have nothing. Tour guides have nobody to guide. Uber drivers circle empty. Street vendors sell almost nothing. The families depending on that steady income now have absolutely nothing. They can't relocate to other cities because they lack resources. They can't find alternative employment because the local economy is broadly depressed. They're stuck in a devastating economic limbo with no visible exit. City and county governments attempted responses, but they arrived late and were completely inadequate for the scale of the problem. Marketing campaigns showing sunny beaches and celebrity culture, empty promises of more police patrols in tourist areas, desperate promotional discounts on attractions and hotels. But these are merely superficial bandages over deep infected wounds. The fundamental problem is that Los Angeles needs radical, complete reinvention, and that requires massive, sustained investment, long-term strategic vision, and political willingness to sacrifice immediate profits for future sustainability. And so far, absolutely nobody with sufficient power has demonstrated genuine commitment to doing that. Politicians think only in 4-year election cycles. Business interests want quick returns. International investors simply moved their capital to more promising emerging markets. And the city withers. But wait, because it gets even worse. The tourism collapse triggered a series of devastating secondary effects nobody fully anticipated. Crime increased exponentially in areas that were previously relatively safe. When thousands of people simultaneously lose legitimate employment and have no alternatives for survival, some inevitably turn to illegal activities out of pure desperation. Robberies targeting the fewer remaining tourists multiplied because there are less targets but same or greater need for income among criminals. Gangs became more aggressive and brazen. Flash mob robberies that once were rare became almost normalized. This creates an absolutely terrible self-perpetuating vicious cycle. Economic desperation generates criminal behavior that drives away more tourists. Fewer tourists means fewer legitimate jobs and more desperation. And the cycle continues, spiraling downward seemingly without end. Angelenos who always prided themselves on laid-back friendliness now look at outsiders with a complex mixture of hope and resentment. Hope because a tourist might mean some income. Resentment because they see the inequality between those who can afford to travel and those struggling to eat. And then there's the environmental and infrastructure decay that worsens daily without solution in sight. Without adequate resources for proper urban maintenance, basic city services fail regularly in numerous areas. Street cleaning became irregular, resulting in accumulation of trash that creates horrible images shared across social media. The famous beaches that defined California dreaming now often feature debris, needles, and human waste. Water systems aging beyond their designed lifespan break constantly. Power infrastructure strains under demand. The freeway system that was revolutionary in the 1950s is now a crumbling nightmare of potholes and congestion. The irony is brutal and tragic. By allowing the physical infrastructure and environmental quality that form the foundation of its tourist appeal to deteriorate progressively, Los Angeles guarantees that even if the economy magically improved, the physical damage might already be irreversible in many aspects. They're literally killing the golden goose while watching helplessly. And the worst part is, many people warned about this for decades. Urban planners pointed out the unsustainable trajectory. Economists highlighted the risks of overdependence on a single sector, but they were systematically ignored because short-term profit and political expedience always trumped prudent long-term planning. Now visit Venice Beach and you'll see perhaps the most dramatic and symbolic case of fall from grace. Venice Beach sold itself as the bohemian heart of Los Angeles. Muscle Beach, street performers, skateboarders, murals, eclectic artists, the boardwalk where anything goes and everyone is welcome. It became the mandatory stop for any visitor wanting to experience authentic, quirky California culture. And then everything collapsed simultaneously from multiple directions. The homeless encampments exploded, transforming the boardwalk into an obstacle course of tents and tarps. Aggressive panhandling became constant and intimidating. Drug use happened openly in broad daylight. Tourists were harassed, threatened, sometimes assaulted. Women reported feeling unsafe walking alone even during daytime. The police attempted crackdowns with heavy-handed tactics that created more tension without solving root causes. The quirky shops began closing because nobody browsed anymore. The street performers lost their audiences and income. And what remains is a ghostly, frightening version of something that was once vibrant and magical. Walk Venice Beach today and you'll see stretches that should be teeming with life, practically deserted. Boarded up storefronts, graffiti covering murals, the famous Muscle Beach area surrounded by fencing. Everything feels like a movie set abandoned after production wrapped and everyone went home. But not everything is completely lost, and this is where this story becomes crucially important far beyond Los Angeles. Because what's happening here is an absolutely brutal lesson about sustainable urban development versus systematic neglect and misguided priorities. There's a fundamental difference between building a city that functions for its inhabitants and visitors simultaneously versus exploiting a glamorous image while ignoring deep structural problems. Los Angeles chose for decades the easier second option, and now pays the steep price of that choice. But theoretically, it could still reinvent itself. It could invest massively in addressing homelessness with housing-first approaches that actually work. It could reform policing to focus on community safety rather than militarized response. It could rebuild infrastructure for 21st century needs. It could create genuine public transportation that reduces car dependency. It could clean and restore its beaches and public spaces. It could preserve and celebrate its diverse cultural heritage. It could become a global model of a city that solved its chronic problems. It could transform current crisis into catalyst for real change. Some small, localized projects are already attempting exactly that, against all odds. Nonprofit organizations working on innovative housing solutions. Community groups organizing neighborhood cleanups and safety patrols. Artists' collectives revitalizing abandoned spaces with murals and cultural programming. Social enterprises creating employment pathways for homeless individuals. These are fragile seeds of hope amid a desert of despair, but they're tiny and extremely vulnerable. They would need massive governmental support. They would need sustained long-term private investment. They would need Angelenos themselves to believe change is possible. They would need time to grow and strengthen organically. The enormous problem is that time is running out rapidly as we speak. Because while Los Angeles desperately tries to find its path back to relevance, real people suffer devastating consequences right now in this exact moment. Entire families without any stable income source, children without adequate nutrition, young people with zero prospects for minimally dignified futures. Hopelessness is feeding a lost generation that might take decades to recover. And this isn't unique to Los Angeles or America. This is happening or will happen in dozens of cities around the world that made similar mistakes of neglecting fundamentals while selling superficial images. Barcelona had to implement drastic restrictions because residents couldn't afford to live in their own city. Paris struggles with visible inequality and urban decay in certain districts. San Francisco faces nearly identical challenges to LA with homelessness and crime. The model of glamorous tourist city without serious urban planning is collapsing globally simultaneously. So what can we learn painfully from Los Angeles? First, that iconic landmarks and perfect weather aren't enough if you don't maintain minimum standards of safety and functional infrastructure. You can have the Hollywood sign and palm trees, but if people fear walking streets, they'll go elsewhere. Second, that extreme visible inequality eventually becomes morally and economically unsustainable. When tourists drive past tent cities and Ubers to reach five-star hotels, eventually that creates explosive tensions and uncomfortable optics that drive visitors away. Third, that reputation takes decades to build, but can be destroyed in years through neglect and mismanagement. Fourth, that modern travelers have unlimited options and will choose destinations where they feel valued, safe, and welcomed. Fifth, that you cannot sell an image that completely contradicts reality because the internet exposes that contradiction instantly through user-generated content. And sixth, perhaps the most painful of all, that the decisions we make today or fail to make determine inexorably whether historic cities exist in dignified form for future generations. Los Angeles could have been completely different if 30 years ago they had invested seriously in affordable housing and homelessness prevention, if they had maintained infrastructure instead of deferring maintenance, if they had diversified the economy beyond entertainment and real estate, if they had built functional public transit when it was still feasible. If they had addressed inequality before it became a humanitarian crisis visible on every corner. But they didn't do any of that consistently. They chose the easy path repeatedly. They kicked problems down the road. And now look at the devastating result. Empty tour buses, shuttered businesses, communities fractured, potential squandered. This is the real brutal cost of chronic misgovernance and misplaced priorities. Walk down Hollywood Boulevard at 11 in the morning today. Feel the eerie silence where there should be pulsing life. Look at the empty spaces on sidewalks that once required crowd control. Watch the few remaining tourists taking quick photos and leaving. Observe the street performers dancing for nobody. Listen to the sound of traffic on streets that carry far fewer people than they were designed for. And understand deeply that this isn't just about a tourist city that failed, it's about a complete model of urban development that collapsed under its own contradictions. It's about the difference between building a city for people versus building an illusion to sell. It's about choosing between long-term investment or short-term exploitation. It's about remembering that cities are living organisms requiring constant care, not just clever marketing. Los Angeles is being abandoned progressively. That's an incontestable fact. The numbers never lie. The empty streets don't lie. The closed establishments don't lie. The crime statistics don't lie. The desperate homelessness crisis doesn't lie. But it's still not absolutely too late for other American cities and global metropolises to learn this painful lesson. It's still not too late for Los Angeles itself to radically reinvent if it finds courageous leadership and adequate resources. It's still not too late for us as citizens to demand much better, to vote consciously for competent leaders, to demand accountability and transparency, to prioritize investments in housing, infrastructure, public safety, and human services over flashy projects that photograph well but solve nothing. Because in the end, this isn't really just about Los Angeles specifically. It's about all the once great cities we're allowing to deteriorate through neglect and misguided priorities. It's about all the communities we're sacrificing at the altar of short-term greed and political expediency. It's about all the cultural and natural heritage we're destroying through convenient ignorance. It's about asking ourselves seriously what kind of society we want to build and leave behind. Whether we want our children and grandchildren to enjoy functional, safe, beautiful cities, or whether we're willing to let everything decay while looking away and pretending not to see. Empty tables at restaurants that were once packed, silent sidewalks that teemed with energy, hotels operating at 60% capacity, vendors without customers. Dreams deferred, potential wasted. That's Los Angeles today in this moment. A painful warning, an expensive lesson, an opportunity that still exists but closes rapidly. Perhaps the last chance to do differently before damage becomes completely irreversible. Perhaps the final moment to choose substance over image. Perhaps the last call to remember that the City of Angels earned that name for reasons that go beyond geography and include people, culture, creativity, and soul. If you've felt this change in a place you loved deeply, if you've watched a city transform from vibrant to struggling, share your story in the comments below. And if this opened your eyes to the true cost of urban mismanagement and neglect, subscribe, because the next story will reveal which American cities are doing exactly the opposite and thriving while LA withers, and what we can learn urgently from them before it's too late for the places we call home.